So Scott is the chair of the National Advisory Council on Poverty. And he was named to that position in August 2019. And after spending 19 previous years with the government of New Brunswick, working on poverty reduction. He worked with the Department of Social Development and the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation. And during that time, Scott supported the creation, that needs to be shut down, the creation and evolution of the community inclusion networks. And that's helped with the development of over 500 community projects. He's worked on over 500 community projects. That's pretty exciting. He's also sat on the boards of the Atlantic Summer Institute, that would be us, the Healthy Eating Physical Activity Coalition, and Team Rural New Brunswick. Scott's a student of life. He seeks out new, innovative, interesting, different, and then connects them together or connects them with existing services or systems. He lives and works from a strength-based approach where all people have something to contribute. He is passionate about asset-based community development, storytelling, literacy, community transportation, and social enterprise. And for the members from our youth program that are attending this session, it was Scott who introduced the learning circles that we have enjoyed so much yesterday and this morning.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy. So everybody, welcome to Let's Talk Politics. It's actually not going to be very political. It'll be more policy-based, but I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Chief Darlene Bernard from Lennox Island. We have Mayor Don Arnold from the City of Moncton. We have Sean Casey, the MP for Charlottetown. And myself, which I got a beautiful introduction by Kathy. It was way too long, but I appreciate the sentiment. So we're here to have a conversation today. So Dawn asked me what I had intended for this panel, and I said I wanted to have bring 4 interesting people together and have an interesting conversation. And that's what we'll talk about today. We're going to talk about policy and upstream and how positive policy can affect how we live, work, and play. How this foundation of support can create an environment for good child and youth mental health by creating an environment for good families and a place where we can contribute and live and thrive and all the good things. When I first talked to Patsy about this panel, I was really talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which I think can provide us with a roadmap on how to get to where we want to go as a planet, but also as a country and a province or Atlantic region and a community and individuals. So I work in social development, Sustainable Development Goal number 1, which is no poverty. No poverty would be a huge one. Poverty is a big impact on mental health, on addictions, on housing, on food security, on almost everything. Poverty is in there. If it's, I once described poverty as the lack of the social determinants of health. So if you lack these social determinants, then there's a good chance you'll be living in poverty, or the other way around, because poverty doesn't always work one way. Sometimes it's generational. Sometimes you're born into poverty, and it's nothing to do with you, and it probably isn't anything to do with the people living in poverty. It's most of the time there's systems in place that have been put in place that have forgot one or more groups. And it's often those groups that are living in poverty. And through the National Advisory Council, we've been across the country. Actually, we started in March. So the first week of March, we started in Vancouver. By March 13th, we had gotten to Winnipeg, and the whole world shut down, or just got put on pause, I guess. So it was an interesting travel back through 5 empty airports to get back to Fredericton and Site for 2 weeks on the 13th or the 14th of March. But we've continued to go on and figure out how those things, how a lot of the conversations we heard and a lot of the comments we heard from the people we talked to, engaged probably over 250 people throughout the first 2 weeks. and how their experience of poverty, what that was, what that meant to them, what does poverty mean to you? It was a really interesting conversation because poverty is very individual. No one experiences exactly the same way, but we try to put policies in place to treat it all the same way. So we learned that a lot of the really positive kind of promotions or programs or projects that are going on in poverty reduction are really focused on the individual, and they're not a control model, but they're an order model, and where they try to set the participants up for success, provide wraparound supports, provide all of the mental, physical, so it's they're not punitive. They don't make you like line up to get a room for the night. They really take the whole person into account. They make sure that you have food and you're taken care of. I think that idea of caring for each other really goes a long way in this poverty world, but also goes a long way in this policy development. How do we create policy that enables people to care for each other, and doesn't assume that somebody else will do it? I think that a lot of that is stepping up, moving towards the greater good. How do we, as a society, reconnect or recommit to our shared humanity? That's a big question, because a lot of times out west, we saw people that had been victims of racism or sexism or classism, but there's a lot of ways that people get divided and put down, and aren't able to, because of whatever the structures put in place, aren't able to have any free time. One person said it was a full-time job being poor because of the amount of hoops you have to jump through to get your basic needs met. Housing, if you have to wait to get into a shelter, that's one thing. If you have to wait in line to get food, if you have to wait in line to get medical services, if you have to wait in line, fill out forms, go somewhere else. The bureaucracy we've built around people to be worthy of the services that we offer is a challenge. And I don't think they were intentional. I think that they've built up over time. And there's a 5% or less than 5% of the people that are trying to cheat the system, and there's 95% of the people that are just trying to get along with what they have where they are. And I think we develop a lot of policy for the 5%, and I think a lot of the policy should be developed for the 95%. And I think that a lot of policy we've developed municipally, provincially, federally, over the time has been really reactionary. We want to make sure whatever awful thing doesn't happen again. And that happens over and over again. There's a lot of unintended consequences to that, but it takes some. You have to be able to take your kind of nose off the grindstone for long enough to look around, and that's hard in a lot of situations, because you're probably always getting complaints or challenges or problems or questions that you're receiving from your constituency, saying, "Oh, I can't get this, or I can't do this, or I want to do this thing." But you have to be able to have some time to remove yourself from that, to think kind of more, well, how do we look forward? How do we think about the next generation? What is the stuff we're doing today? How is that going to impact the people that are going to live here next? So we're really acting as stewards, I guess, in our policy. And the policy put in place, it lasts for years. Sometimes policies don't ever get rewritten, no matter how much time changes. I remember seeing someone talking about muskets and the right to bear arms, and how it would take 20 minutes to load a musket, but that was the world that the forefathers in America talked about. But we have a lot of those things that continue on. We have a lot of acts that are old and outdated, but they take a long time to get into, and they take a lot of time to think about before you do. So I have this wonderful panel, and I don't want to take up any more time, but I do want to invite Chief Bernard to talk about her community and the policies and practices they put in place to look forward to the next generations, and how that these things are helping support child and youth mental health by creating the environment that people and families and children can thrive. Darlene.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here this afternoon to just, deliver some key messages and talk a little bit about influencers and barriers and my perspective working with the community that I do and my role as chief. So anyway, with the pandemic, it has created an opportunity for us to hit the reset button and look at what isn't working in our current systems and make the much needed changes to ensure we create systems that work for all of us, because we are all in this together, right? The next normal does not have to be the old normal, which we know was in a crisis situation before the pandemic. This is our chance to build back better. So I am going with my written speech that I have here, because I feel like if I don't do that, then I'll just be talking about a whole lot of stuff and go all way off topic. And I feel that if you're giving me time to listen, then I want to be able to give right to you right like that. So anyway, I'm just gonna
we'll get to this. We'll get to your wisdom after.
Oh, well, there's a lot of wisdom in what I've written here, because I've thought about it. Okay. I don't like doing off the cuff. Okay, so anyway, this is an opportunity to discuss ways to coordinate positive policy changes to increase mental well-being for all of society. I don't have all the answers, just my thoughts and perspectives. With this once-in-a-century opportunity to look at resetting our approach to mental health promotion, it is important for us to create a vision for the future and work towards realizing that vision. This is not a time to move forward in increments and tweaks. This is a chance for us to leap forward. We begin with a vision, then we create a roadmap to get the outcomes that we want and need. My perspectives, I can only speak as a First Nation woman, informed by my role as chief. And that is what I feel my contribution is here to this forum. Although I am not a mental health worker, I am called upon quite often and quite frequently to deal with sometimes very complex mental health issues, ranging from fallout of childhood trauma to sexual, physical, and mental abuse, as well as dealing with the hopelessness of our people who are homeless, jobless, and those who are lost in addictions to opioids. This comes with the job of being a chief. You have to know a little something about everything, but also accept that you are not an expert. You have to know what you don't know. This is where, as a leader, you go to great lengths to surround yourself with people who have that expertise and knowledge. That said, I think that some of it is common sense and knowing that listening means something, and just being there sometimes can bring comfort in certain circumstances. We also have to deal with systematic racism that prevents real challenges in our day-to-day lives. We need to be demanding that more resources are made available, resources that are appropriate to addressing the incredible harm that has been done to our families over the centuries and still continues today. I want to re-emphasize that we need to establish that vision, our vision, for how we can reset our approach to mental health promotion. You cannot reach a destination if you don't establish where that destination is and have a shared vision. I believe the influencers are political will. If the government of the day are willing to work with the First Nations in true reconciliation, accepting our shared history of inequality and brutality on the side of government towards the First Peoples, then I believe there is a real path forward. One based on mutual respect, the willingness of government to accept that we are the grassroots leaders and we know what the needs are, and we actually have ideas and solutions to offer. Creating environments for optimal development and meaningful opportunities for our families, and that means being inclusive, like actually working towards supporting the whole family. Creating a holistic approach to promoting mental health, such as community gatherings, gardening, cleanup, traditional events, finding our artistic talents, and ensuring that all families have their needs met individually and collectively. Building and fostering social enterprises. These help to build skills that are transferable, and the enterprise is usually something that is needed in the community. Ours on Lennox Island are the Shellfish Hatchery and our thrift store called Melsinogam, the shop. These enterprises are so valuable to our community, and we are building more. I believe that if we can help to create true livelihood for our people, that is their passion, then we have done a good portion of our job in building strong, healthy communities. Supporting innovative, flexible programming that support our families. The PRIDE program, Jordan's Principle, our Family Violence Prevention program, our Women's Shelter, supports for parents, and full day K4 are all ways that support mental health and well-being. And adapting the education, employment and training, development portions, partnerships to reflect the new realities are all a part of the work moving forward if we are to advance our people. So work never stops there. We're always adapting what we're doing in those fields of economic development, education, employment and training, and partnerships, right? And I'm a big supporter of the guaranteed basic income model that the province of Prince Edward Island is researching. I believe that when families and individuals have adequate resources, that they will make better choices and be in a position to take advantage of opportunities that will bring them to self-sustainability and true livelihood. We just have to help them find their passion and support their journey. Working to support families as a whole reduces stress in the home. We have to stop using our white family members against our people by working towards the well-being of our families as opposed to only dealing with members. Seeking inclusivity instead of excluding will go a long way to promote positive mental health for all. Connecting to internet. Right now with the COVID lingering, we are more than ever reliant on internet. Rural areas are in desperate need of this tool to manage a new way of doing business and living within a pandemic state. And of course, the alignment of cross-sectoral work models to ensure needs are being met, such as like case conferencing, and where you're looking at families as a whole or individuals as a whole, rather than just like zeroing in on just one thing, because we're all like, it's a very global thing right around us. So some of the barriers, there are some definite barriers that we face in resetting our approach to mental health promotion. Looking beyond these barriers, we can see a vision for the future. Address the end the racism entrenched in policies such as the Indian Act. End fighting over jurisdiction to provide services that led to Jordan's Principle. The challenges we face with systematic racism, why the need for child welfare legislation through Bill C-92, along with the people to be understood that climate of racism entrenched in these policies and institutions. So we need people to understand that, what's there and what it is. So federal and provincial bureaucracies, even with political will, it's hard to get the wheels turning sometimes. And that's where, like, as the First Nations, we are very frustrated because, like, on the political level, like, we have a lot of support, but then the bureaucracy kind of gets us all tied up and jumbled up, and then things take really long, and it's very frustrating. Education and acknowledgement of privilege. Even allies and friends sometimes often don't fully understand the obstacles presented by the failure to acknowledge and understand privilege. That there are simply obstacles that First Nations people must pass that others don't even have to. And I always say, everybody else jumps through 10 hoops, I have to jump through 100 to get the same results. So that's there, and it's very real. Address childhood trauma, the effects of intergenerational trauma, residential schools, and now the fallout from the day school process. How do we adequately address this horrific harm to our children who are now struggling adults? Income inequality, poverty, addictions, food insecurity, these are all barriers to mental health and wellness. Address the basic and foundational needs for housing. I cannot stress how much we need to seriously invest in housing for our people. To me, this is the #1 deterrent to good mental health, and that is the overcrowding of it. All our communities are struggling with real housing shortages, and housing repair costs present an ongoing circle of madness as there's never enough to actually repair a house. So we are forever placing Band-Aids. So some of those policies, and I'll say the RAP policy needs to be overhauled in my opinion. And instead of having forums, continually having forums on housing, let's start building houses. Let's put that money into actually building some houses in communities rather than still just talking about it. Our urban areas, like we have to look at housing even off the reserve in urban areas, because the large majority of our off-reserve members live in urban areas, like in PEI, Charlottetown, and Summerside, right? And they're all struggling to find affordable housing. So we have our First Nation people, the Mi'kmaq, living in PEI in poverty in Summerside and Charlottetown. So we do really need to look at housing issues. We all know unequivocally that housing is a major issue in First Nation communities and is a barrier for families in many profound ways. No privacy, no ability to parent appropriately in overcrowded situations, no place to study or even to think and read quietly. Imagine living in this situation. 3-bedroom bungalow with more than 15 people, which would equate to at least 4 families, all jam-packed in a very small space. Unimaginable to most, yet a reality to many in Canada's First Nation communities. We all know this, but what is really being done about it? Promotion of and access to relevant mental health supports right in the communities. And I say that because like we need to start incorporating more traditional healers in our work here. Professionals need to be trained to deal with childhood trauma in adults, because we have adults who are still struggling with childhood trauma. So that has to be dealt with. And we need more support for men and boys in the sense that they need an actual space that they can go to, especially upon returning, like from treatment and things like that. Most just go right back to where it all started and the cycle continues. So we've done a lot and we need to continue to do a lot for women, you know, in violent situations and things like with our women's shelter and things like that. But we've left the root cause, the men who are dealing with trauma and not knowing how to deal with that. So they're causing a lot of the problems with the women. So we really do need to look at men's and boys' issues and how we can support them to deal with the traumas of their lives so that they can get back into being productive members of society, which I believe they all have the potential to do that. They just need that extra support, because right now they leave the communities like with good intentions to get that support, get that treatment and all that stuff. And then they come back to what? Nothing here for them. But anyway, then access to internet. It's a huge barrier in this day and age when you don't have a reliable connection. And through the COVID, we've all been struggling with that, the internet connections and trying to get our meetings done. Especially in the First Nation community, Lennox Island, like we have very bad connections here, so it's been quite frustrating. And I think that in this day and age, it's something that needs to be invested in, because this is where we can do a lot more outreach and teaching and a new way of connecting, right? And all the kids are into that, so that's how you got to kind of engage them. And last but not least, and probably the most important thing we can do to foster mental health wellness in First Nation communities is to support the reestablishment of our rich language and culture within our communities and work towards recognition and reconciliation with the settler population by teaching them about the First People and that we are here to stay and we have so much to offer. And we can bring amazing things to life that will not only support our communities, but all communities that surround us. I have always said that happy, healthy, prospering First Nations have a real positive ripple effect on those who surround us. I hope that we can come together, create that vision for the future, and then together we can reach that destination. As I said, we're all in it together. Walalyok. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief Bernard. I appreciate your comments. Very insightful and lots to think about. Mayor Don Arnold, you're up next. Ladies first, right?
Well, Well, thank you, Scott, and thanks, Chief Bernard. That was excellent. Thank you for this opportunity. Initially, I was fairly perplexed as to why a municipal politician would be asked to participate in something like this. Child and youth mental health is not something that we have any jurisdiction over at a municipal level in New Brunswick. It's a provincial responsibility in New Brunswick: social development, health, education. So I was sort of like, well, why did Scott ask me? But like Kathy, I have known and admired Scott, and I knew he wouldn't lead me astray. So here I am. But then as I started thinking about it, we had a conversation last Friday of sort of how this was going to be. And I realized that we'd actually done a lot more than I had realized. And we actually have, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I have show and tell. So we have a social inclusion plan. And we were the first municipality in New Brunswick to actually have a social inclusion officer. So this has been a value of ours for a long time. It's a very strong pillar in our strategic plan. And mental health is one of the pillars in the social inclusion plan. And we've implemented a number of the initiatives, actually, once I started digging in a little bit more. Crisis intervention training for employees, actively funding a number of nonprofits that deal directly with youth mental health. We've hosted things like a sidewalk talk at City Hall in conjunction with the Canadian Mental Health Association. But then the more I thought about it, I thought of some of the other initiatives that I believe are truly upstream in a different way. So one thing that I'm very proud of that we've been doing for a number of years at the City of Moncton is something called the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. So we actually gather, we have 3 representatives of all of our high schools. We bring them together on a monthly basis, and it is so powerful to hear from the youth, to get their feedback. I use them kind of like a focus group in a certain way. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And they've had amazing debates because they meet and then they plan something called a youth fest. And that's where high school kids, about 100 of them from the city, come together and they form a council, elect a mayor, and they debate real issues that we're grappling with, with everything from snow plans to plastic bags to lowering the voting age. And I find that this is just such a real tangible way to engage youth, to educate, to communicate, and to really allow them to realize that their voices are super important and that we need them and that they need to be part of the conversation. I feel that sometimes today we have youth that are more interested in, what's going on in another country and thinking of, more global concerns, which is, don't get me wrong, that's great. But I think they forget about the impact that they can have at the local level. So that has been really excellent. Have a grade 4 project. So this is something I started a few years ago, and because I personally love grade 4s, but I go to all the inner city schools each year and chat with the kids about municipal government and the kind of change we could affect at this level. And so it's education partly, but then we have this thing called Moncton's Big Idea Contest. And the idea is to get them excited enough to think of something that we could actually do in Moncton. So they have to understand that it's something that we could do. Well, the ideas have been incredible. This is one of them. These are grade 4s. Housing, always about housing, affordable housing. So they made this great plan. Another year, they came up with a big idea book. And what was really neat about this was it's all cartoons. They really did a really cool presentation, but they came up with the idea that, not all playgrounds are created equal. Some need, the kids don't have access to summer camps and that sort of thing. So we as a city could maybe invest more in our playground supervision program in certain areas. And we were like, yeah, that's a really good idea. But if we hadn't talked to those kids, we never would have thought of that. We were just sort of using a one-size-fits-all approach. So that really turned out to be great. And when you see grade 4s realizing that their idea could actually happen and that they have the power I'm telling you, they become very engaged citizens, and they then go home and they educate their parents about a lot of this stuff too. So that's been just fantastic. Also, I mean, the importance of the great outdoors. Huh? So I think we've all realized, just particularly during COVID, just how important our public spaces are, our trails, our parks. And, you know, that's something that we do at the city, you know, is we're responsible for that kind of thing. And as an avid cyclist, I cycle to work and back every day. It's about 20-kilometer round trip. It's so great. And now I'm seeing so many more kids and families out on their bikes, and just, we have a bike share program here. It's just to see people out using the trails in this way. And in fact, the New Brunswick Recreation New Brunswick just did a study, the results just came out this week, and 98% of the people interviewed consider recreation and parks an important government service. So that's great. During COVID, it was hard though, because we received a lot of pressure to close down our parks, but we realized that, you know, it's really important that our trails stay open and people have that opportunity to get out. And then finally, another upstream, truly upstream initiative that I believe fundamentally in is the importance of diversity around our decision-making tables. Because if we all look alike, sound alike, and have the same life experiences, then we're gonna just keep on doing the same old thing. And I don't think that's great. So I wanted to give you a little anecdote about that. So after one of my youth fests, I got a message on Instagram, not so good at Instagram, but anyway, I got this message and I wasn't even sure what it was. Anyway, it was a young girl that had attended, and she said, listen, myself and some of my friends would like to meet with you because we're having issues at our high school. And I'm like, well, I don't really have anything to do with your high school, but sure, come on in. Well, they had some issues regarding smoking in bathrooms and their ability to bring a menstrual product with them, and they had to carry it in their hands, and they were just flabbergasted. They're grade 9 girls. And I thought, there is no way that they would have come to any of the mayors that came before me, who were all male, to discuss something like that. So it was neat. And for me, it became a really important advocacy project to empower those girls to see that their voices were important and they could affect change, and they did. But I find a lot of times youth don't know how to affect that change. So any of these initiatives where we can really engage youth in a meaningful way, help them to understand that their voices are important, I think are really, really important. But I know that one of the questions that Scott really wanted to touch on was how do you change these policies and stuff? It's tough. I'm telling you, you know, we have a strategic plan like everybody else. You know, we got our priorities. We know what we're legislatively mandated to do: drinkable water, safe streets, garbage collection, public spaces, urban planning, public transportation, enforcement of bylaws, fire, police, you know, growing our economy, community events, and doing it all in a fiscally responsible manner. But I think, and to Chief Bernard's point, you know, that I love that build back better, that what an opportunity we have right now to do that. And COVID has really forced the issue. So in that, you remember this, you know, social inclusion plan, I realized that part of it, we did have something that we needed, you know, some diversity policies as far as inclusion. Well, Black Lives Matters really made us do that. Like all of a sudden we're like, okay, so that was something that was sort of on the back burner. Oh no, it can't be on the back burner anymore. So anti-racism, inclusion, diversity policies, while we knew we needed them and we had them there, it's only through COVID and through Black Lives Matter that has really pushed us. So sometimes, well, we're almost always reactive. And that's really quite unfortunate, I think, but there's a lot on our plate at any one time. I mean, we have 85 different business centers just in the city of Moncton. So to get that, let something swim upstream, it's tough. And sometimes you need something like this to happen. In fact, I wanted to, if I was naming my talk, I would call it something like, how do we get things done without needing the zombie apocalypse? I mean, that, because sometimes things have to get so bad before you can make those changes. So how do we really have those conversations? Like, for sure, Black Lives Matter, defunding the police. I mean, if we know in Moncton, 80% of the calls are mental health related. How do we have a conversation around that in our community in a respectful way, and break down the silos? So there's a lot. Am I close to time? I think I must be pretty close to time. But two more, just a couple more things here. I also believe that policies that we come up with that aren't necessarily related to mental health are helpful to kids today. So a couple of different things. We've just been declared an international city of peace, which I find to be an incredibly hopeful thing. We declared a climate emergency, and then we're working on real tangible outcomes. I think for youth today, when I talk to them, the environment is super important to them. They really care deeply about this. So for us taking leadership position on that and saying, you know, that we're going to be part of the solution, but we want to hear from them on it too, I think is super, super important. And of course, I can't finish without touching on, you know, the crisis in affordable housing. It's huge. Like, Moncton has not experienced anything like this before, and it's just rampant right now, and it's really tough, you know. And as a mayor, much like a chief, like, it all comes to you, and your job is to kind of make sense of it all. So I've got the business community that are just furious that these people are in our community, right? Like, they're really beside themselves. And then you've got people that right now, because of COVID, they don't have a place to go. So they don't have access to a toilet. They don't have access to a shower, and they have shopping carts with their stuff in it because that is everything they have, and they don't have a place to put it. So you've got the two sides and trying to make sense of it all. I mean, it all comes back to affordable housing, and get back to my grade fours, they get it. They know that affordable housing is what we need. So in conclusion, what do we need to do upstream policy making? We need diversity around decision-making tables. We need meaningful citizen and youth engagement. We need to educate, and communicate. And we need to break down the barriers between the different levels of government. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Mayor Arnold. I really like that you narrowed in on that sweet spot of grade 4. I think that's still when the kids like adults, and you can still be super cool. And like grade 5, grade 6, now my daughter's going to grade 9. If I showed up at her school to talk about anything, she would disown me. But I appreciate that comment, and thank you for your thoughtful comments. And B. Casey, you're up.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you for inviting me to present. I really have a tough act to follow after those last couple of presentations. What I propose to do, given that I'm not as I guess as close to the ground as Mayor Arnold or Chief Bernard, I want to talk a bit about policy development, provide some examples of upstream policies that have been enacted and that are in force. Talk about the barriers to policymaking and the opportunities that lie ahead. So that's kind of an outline of where I'm going. At the federal level, the policy, the start of the policy process is actually a partisan one. So I'm a member of the Liberal Party, and within our party, there's quite a fixed process to policy development. I expect it's very similar in all of the others, but once every couple of years, there's a policy convention. The policy convention considers resolutions that are brought forward by grassroots members of the party. These grassroots members are organized in some cases into different caucuses. So there's a specific caucus for women. There's an Indigenous caucus. There's a seniors caucus. There's a youth caucus, and there's also electoral district association. So 338 of those across the country. And there is also an opportunity for input directly from the federal caucus. So all of these groups within the party have a chance to put forward resolutions that are debated, voted upon, and if adopted, form part of the official policy of the Liberal Party of Canada. That's the one that I'm familiar with. Like I say, I expect that there would be similar processes within the other parties. The policy book is then something that is available and considered when the platform is developed to present to the people to seek to gain their approval. And not all of the policies make it into the platform, but that's the opportunity for the grassroots members to have a say, to have an input. I provide you with all of this background because I expect one of the things that you're going to want to take away from this conference is where are my opportunities, where are our opportunities to have input into policy making at a political level. So you go from the policy convention to the platform. After an election, every single minister is given a mandate letter from the Prime Minister, and the mandate letter by and large is lifting sections out of the platform and saying, okay, you're responsible for this. And those mandate letters are of course now public. So what happens with the mandate letter is the ministers sit down with the bureaucracy, and there's essentially teams assigned to every single point on the mandate letter to be able to check these things off within the mandate. That's where a ton of policy gets developed once it is elucidated, if you will, in the mandate letter. At all times, the emphasis is on evidence-based decision making within the public service in order to develop the policies to fulfill the mandates that are that form the basis of the party being elected. At the same time, there are 22 standing committees of Parliament, and those standing committees of Parliament have a responsibility to hear from experts, stakeholders, citizens, with respect to government policy, with respect to legislation, with respect to spending plans, and all of those things invariably get put into a report that to which the cabinet must respond. So that it's another avenue, if you will, for policy making. So from all of this comes legislative measures, so new legislation, changes in legislation, and fiscal measures, so things that end up in the budget. Some examples of upstream policy that have an impact on youth and children's mental health. Probably the centerpiece under this administration is the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted more than 300,000 kids out of poverty. The enhancement of parental leave, the Canada Summer Jobs Canada Summer Jobs program, one that is in the news for all the wrong reasons, that is at a false start, unfortunately, is the Canada Student Service Grant. So that was the maligned program, which had a laudable goal of encouraging and promoting volunteerism among the youth. Learn to Camp programs during Canada 150. You saw free admission to the national parks. Most recently, as part of COVID, there's been a bunch of infrastructure funds that have been identified or repurposed for active transportation and walking trails. So this is an 80-20 split between the federal government and other funding partners for active transportation. Within Heritage Canada, there's cultural spaces, something that is extremely important to who we are and to promoting that. There's been lots of talk around affordable housing. For the first time in a generation, the federal government is invested in housing in a significant way in the multi-billion-dollar national housing strategy. Chief Bernard referenced Indigenous languages, and that's something that, as you know, has been is contained in the mandate letter of Minister Miller. And the promotion of languages is also so important to who we are. We have seen just recently a pretty significant step taken with respect to the promotion of minority language rights, and that is to be able to identify who has the rights. The census has to be properly done, and this was something that was recently announced that is going to provide better information in order to assure that those that have the right to language, to education in the language of the official language of their choice will have that. Closer to home in Prince Edward Island, where I'm from, there's a $50 million investment in public safety housing, which will include a mental health campus to replace an aging the Hillsborough Hospital, a mental health institution. The innovative thing about this public safety housing is that it will include life skills training, access to assisted technologies, and social housing. The Farm Credit Corporation has a program to help with mental health for those in the agriculture sector. It's called Rooted in Strength. And there has been no shortage of programs since COVID struck to ensure that young people and families have a chance to withstand this. And certainly the most well-known one would be the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was recently extended to 28 weeks. And the transition from the Canada Emergency Response Benefit over to the EI system, the caregiver benefit, and the other suite of benefits was also recently announced to allow for people to have money in their pockets and food in their table, to be able to a certain extent to provide for their families throughout this time. The barriers to the development of upstream policies generally, including those that touch on mental health, I would probably start with this adage, and that is something that I've learned in my time in politics. Everyone is in favor of progress. It's just change they don't like. And one of the most significant barriers to policy making generally is the fact that we're in an electoral cycle, and this is even more acute in minority governments. Invariably, people who run for office do so because they want to make a difference. Not long after they get into office, they like what they do, and they become disproportionately focused on getting reelected. So the electoral cycle, as far as I'm concerned, is a barrier to durable, sustainable policy making. And the last one is, of course, competing priorities. There are always competing priorities for attention, competing priorities for dollars, and conflicting jurisdictions. I can I don't want to get bogged down in it, but the Section 91, Section 92 of the Constitution Act, there are certain things that are exclusive provincial responsibility. There are certain things that are exclusive federal responsibility. There are some areas where there are overlap. Healthcare is one where it's partially funded by the federal government, completely administered by the provincial governments. You see side deals to ensure that home care and mental health are given priority, but at the end of the day, if the governments, if the respective level of governments aren't aligned and can't work together, the losers are the stakeholders, the patients and the taxpayers. It's said that you should never waste a good crisis, and COVID falls exactly in that category. Chief Bernard used the words "build back better," and I can tell you that the Prime Minister has now established those words into his lexicon, and it's rare that you see him make any remarks without those three words. They will undoubtedly form the theme of what lies ahead in the throne speech. And I mentioned this in the roundtable that we participated in just before lunch, but before today, there has been a disproportionate focus on economic growth, on the economy, on balancing the books. COVID, in my view, has changed the dialogue on that, and that is a good thing. As we build back better, I think you're going to see, I know you're going to see a more holistic evaluation of the success of our direction. By that, I mean that we won't be preoccupied with GDP, economic growth, and balancing the books, but the metrics will be all about well-being, poverty reduction, the reduction of serious crime, the reduction of emissions, the reduction of income inequality, the enhancement of volunteerism, food security, air quality. Those will be the things by which we will be measured as we build back better. It's a transformational, historic challenge that we're facing. And it's a challenge that, although we as government must lead it, it can only happen with input. It can only happen with effort. It can only happen with having the support of civil society in order to be able to build back better. That's the challenge we face, and I guess that's the challenge that I lay before you, to be part of that in every way that you can. This really is an opportunity to build something that is substantially different and substantially better in its focus and direction. I look forward to the discussion and the questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Inspiring words. I think that the Build Back Better is easy to get behind. I like the focus on a new bottom line. I think what we are measured by in the future doesn't have to be what we were measured by in the past. The economic side of it has to be balanced with the social and the environmental side. If not, then everything becomes a little bit skewed and we forget what's important. So we're going to questions from the panel. We have two big questions, and we had one question from the youth group. The youth group, they weren't in grade 4, I don't believe, but I think they're still have some benefit. And the question was really around how come what the public puts forward isn't always accepted and put into action. But let me just kind of massage that a little bit. How can the public help the political process move policy forward? How can the public help? I think MPKC talked about it when he talked about the policy forums every few years. But how, and on different levels, how can the public help? And maybe just put your hand up, or you can unmute your mic so we can have a talk.
I have a couple of ideas.
Go for it.
Not going to rage immediately would be good. That's helpful.
Good.
You know, I think we need civil discourse, and I guess the answer to the question, you know, how come what the public puts forward isn't immediately adopted? And 2 words, it's complicated. I mean, there's often a lot more to an issue than the public sees immediately. Like, people say to me, just fix it. Just, you know, just fix it. And so that tolerance to maybe dig in a little bit deeper and get informed. And I think that, you know, in civil society, we have the social contract, and part of that social contract is, as a citizen, you have a responsibility too, to educate yourself a little bit. I don't know any politician that won't sit down with a citizen and, you know, have a conversation and talk about some of these issues. And how do we, you know, amplify that a little bit more and have more engagements, but they have to be done in a civil manner. Like, when people just start, you know, blasting and making everything personal and being awful to another human being, politician or not, we still are human beings. I would say that, you know, it has to be civil. And, but I'm a firm believer. I'll meet with anyone. And I think that, you know, when people are thoughtful and, you know, have put some thought into it, I mean, I don't know anyone who won't sit down and talk to them about it and, you know, have a discussion.
So educated, civil, and not enraged.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the not rage first. I think that's probably a good starting point.
And I think there's an expectation. I think that there's an expectation to have an immediate response, right? And I used to be one that will respond right away, and it's not always the best response. So now I take time and think, well, you know, just because someone's inboxing me at 7 o'clock in the evening, I don't need to respond right away. I can wait till tomorrow. I can sleep on it, think it over, right? And I think that because of social media, I think that that's like what people's general expectations are now, like with leaders, like they just feel like we're so much more, we're there for them. Like they have more access to us, a lot more access to us. And then if you don't respond right away, then you're criticized for it on Facebook. It's like, you know, where the hell is the chief, you know, and, you know, why isn't she responding to me? And I'm like, holy fuck, oh, frig. You know, we really do need to have time to look at things. Like, if someone calls me on the weekend, you're not going to get an answer because I have to wait till my staff are at work on Monday morning to get the question answered, right? Because I don't know it all. And I find that's a frustrating thing right now. And I think that if people could just generally, like, you know, okay, let's all work together, let's have dialogue, and let's do this in a civil manner, and not have such great expectations to have everything done overnight. I know I'm good. And I, like, people say, oh, you're a great chief and all that, but I can't do everything overnight. Like, you have to have time to do things. And I think that people don't have that anymore. Time is no longer relevant.
So the idea that instant gratification kind of lifestyle people are leaving now, and the 24/7 news cycle and the access, you know, immediate access really through Instagram, Mayor Arnold, or through other kind of social media or Facebook. It seems like everyone's present all the time.
May I have the walking stick, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. So it's Samantha. Are you going to turn the video on?
No, thank you.
Okay.
So I have a lot of really pointed, targeted comments and suggestions. So I'll just start with one because I'm assuming it'll generate quite a lot of discussion.
Sure.
I've done some research into statutes and legislation, just as an example, in PEI. So we're talking about getting diversity around the decision-making table, yet in our legislative history, we've had nothing but people of privilege drafting our legislation. And to the point where we've actually just had a member of parliament just refer to it as a mental health institution. And I am a mental health advocate, and I found that offensive. That is an example of privilege. And that is what was written into the laws in the 1800s when we called it a mental health institution. That is just disrespectful, improper language. And that is in line with the discrimination that mentally ill should be removed from society in an institution and not part of our community, that they're a danger and we don't have a contribution to give to the community. So right here, I just witnessed discrimination right in this forum by a member of parliament. So I'd like everybody to comment.
Perhaps I'll start, Samantha. As you know, I was referring to the Hillsborough Hospital. If the language that I used was offensive, I apologize. I am personally aware that there's excellent work being done at the Hillsborough Hospital. The model that has been proposed and that has been funded to replace the Hillsborough Hospital is one that is more holistic. But if the language that I used to describe the...
I would argue for Mr. Casey. There's been a pledge to do this in 2025, but we're aware that people are in crisis now. Can you respond? Why are we waiting until 2025?
Well, what I can tell you is that the federal commitment was $50 million, and that was announced more than a year ago. I expect that you're aware that this falls within the jurisdiction of the province, albeit the feds have agreed to contribute to the construction. So your answer would probably your question would probably be better placed to Minister Aylward, because the feds have come to the table to the extent that they can within their constitutional jurisdiction.
And I'd also like a response as to what the federal government will do to review all legislation to remove such discriminatory language, such as institutions and language that basically demeans and disrespects people with any mental illness.
That is something in terms of legislative review that is an ongoing process. And it happens every time legislation is amended or introduced. It gets significant scrutiny before parliamentary committees as well, and there's an opportunity with respect to any law that's passed or amended for the public to have input into it.
Yeah, and I would like some open acknowledgement about class privilege. Because when I started university in Manitoba, my whole plan was to eliminate poverty. That's why I went to university, because I came from poverty. And I was well aware of this over 10 years ago. So I don't even know why it's taken this long, quite frankly. It's really quite embarrassing. And I need some discussion as to why we are still discriminating to treat people with a mental illness as criminals. So like, how can we change this discourse? And every single person around the decision-making table across Canada, I would argue every single one of them is educated. I would imagine all of them probably have college or a university degree. Do any of these decision makers, have they ever lived in poverty? Have they ever lived on minimum wage? So how can we remedy this if everybody around the table is somebody who's lived class privilege and is not anywhere near poverty? And why are we only talking about reducing poverty? We can eliminate poverty. We are a very wealthy country.
Thanks, Samantha. I'll acknowledge my privilege as a white, straight, married, middle-aged male. I've got it all. But privilege is unearned power. And then so at ASI 2014, did a lot of work on how to earn that power, or how to at least share that unearned privilege with the people that need it most, that need their voice, that need their opinions, and they need their ideas amplified. And so that's what I do on the National Advisory Council on Poverty. We have 2 members that have lived in poverty, so 2 members lived experience. But when we went through the whole panel, many people on all of our council, 10 of 10, we had quite a few had experienced poverty, either in their generation or in their parents' generation. I thank you for your questions. We're going to get back to the panel. We have a couple more questions from the roundtables this morning, and the first one, I'll throw it up there, kind of baseball style. If children and youth are the future, how do we enable upstream investment through a policy lens? How do we enable that at the different levels?
Well, I'll jump in. Sure. I think a lot of it has to do with breaking down the barriers. So during COVID, it became very, very clear to us that our schools are not just educating our students, they're feeding them. So there were a lot of hungry children in our community, 700 of them every day, that relied on our breakfast and lunch programs. So immediately our communities stepped up and people from all over came together to fix this during COVID. But wow, generally that's just, that's the province, that's education, So I think it was a really important lesson to a lot of people to realize that it's only like, we have to just break down those barriers, and we all have to, think collectively as to what we're trying to achieve here, and work in that direction, and just kind of figure out how we can do it without it being, this is my jurisdiction, this is your jurisdiction. Breaking down some of that is vitally important.
Chief Bernard?
Yeah, I agree with everything that the mayor is saying there. And I think too, like, the reference a little while back to like engaging the youth and organizing them. Like our First Nation is really doing a lot to try to engage our youth into processes and to be able to be involved, like even like in council meetings that we have. And we always put them on our agenda. Like even sometimes they're not available to come, but like there's usually a representative from this group, and they meet, and they actually are quite organized now, like since I've been elected. And one of my counselors is really big on youth engagement. So she started working with this group, and they meet like with RCMP, to help with them and stuff. And going back to the school and like having school back again, like where you were talking about, like, we're feeding kids. We found out that we're feeding our kids a lot more than like in our school systems, but as well, it's also a safe place for a lot of the kids, right? Because some of them are living in homes that like overcrowding, and all the shit that happens with overcrowding. And so when they go to school, they're actually in a safe place. And, so that's been taken away this last year. So we've seen a lot of like mental health issues coming from that, like kids not being able to be away out of their homes and stuff like that. So I think, that's a big part of like trying to help with mental health in youth, is to engage them and to organize it and do it the right way, and give them their voice at the leadership tables, like, make it formal like we have. And then they come and they talk, and then they feel like they're heard, and then we can start doing things with them, that are from them, not from us. So that's my points on that.
Yeah, I would agree with those comments as well, Scott. And there are all kinds of opportunities at every level, right up to the Prime Minister's Youth Council, for that direct input. But the other thing that I wanted to add was this is something that has only recently been adopted in Prince Edward Island, but I know there are lots of other examples right across the country, and that's a child and youth advocate, which is an independent office to provide that lens on legislation and discussion at the provincial level. So PEI has recently gotten on board with that, but that's yet another mode.
Thank you. So last question. And I think it goes back to kind of the whole gist of our conversation. But so, well, and maybe I'll put it in that, you know, that everyone loves, or, you know, never waste a good crisis, I think you said. So as we build back better, how can all levels, civil society, business, nonprofits, municipal, provincial, federal governments, how can we collaborate more towards making child and youth a priority? You know, stronger families, stronger kids, stronger communities. Maybe I sound like the why right now, but you know, how do we collaborate, and what are some of the ways we can do that? And this is like, we have about 6 minutes left, so.
Well, I think it's data, and I know the MP mentioned, you know, evidence-based decision making, and I think data is really important to all of this. So, as I said earlier, you know, housing, you know, safe, affordable, wraparound service housing is vital. I mean, grade 4s know it. So what we've decided to do in Moncton is do a social impact audit. We're basically going to follow the money, find out where the money is being invested. And you know what? Nobody knows. That is the issue. Like, and what are the true healthcare costs? And so
they do now. You just told them that you're doing this audit. So they know now that you're doing this. Oh, you don't mean no one knows where the money goes? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, we're doing a social impact audit, and I just encourage, you know, like you got to know where the investments, where the money is going, and that's cross-jurisdictional. Like, what are the justice costs? What are the healthcare costs? And when you put it all together, it's substantial. Lethbridge, Alberta, spent $700 million, and they could identify 30 to 35% of it could immediately be reinvested in affordable housing. So I would suggest that data is really important. We got to figure out where the investments are being made. Are they in the right spots? Are there proper measurables? Like that's pretty important, I think.
Wonderful.
Okay. I would just add that, like, I think that, you know, for us to collaborate more, going back to some of our earlier comments, like we need diverse voices around the table for sure. And I think that, you know, if we're going to be serious, we need to start sitting down at a table and start setting priority and goals that are really like grassroots driven, and set the climate and the infrastructure in place that's going to support us to reach those goals. And also then to create that shared vision.
Can I make one last comment? I'm sorry. I just heard a lot of discussion. It seems like there's a lot of emphasis on the child and youth, but I want to make sure, like, we are putting forward a like policy for the whole family, because I'm hearing a lot of divergence in perspectives. Like, I'm hearing people say the whole family holistic approach, and then I hear other people saying, well, child and youth are a priority. So what I've seen in PEI is I think a lot of the money has gone to child and youth mental health services, and we've neglected our adults, who are the people who have a huge ability to affect the mental health of the children. So we can't be providing services for just the kids and saying, oh, well, you know, we don't have enough for the adults. So I want to make sure that this policy being put forward is going to reflect the whole family.
Yeah.
Well, I think I made it pretty clear in my comments that that's exactly what I think. I think as Lennox Island First Nation, we have to change how we even think and how we address our population. Like, you know, when I speak, I don't say, oh, dear Lennox Island band members anymore. I say, dear Lennox Island families, because it's all about inclusion, and we have to work that way. And the children are the biggest priority within that family structure, right? In order for us to have healthy families, we have to have healthy children and know that we can protect our children.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I agree. I think there needs definitely.
I think you might have summed up the entire Upstream argument in one comment. because a lot of the focus goes to one group when we know that it would be better spent on in the entire group. But there's different, it's hard to treat a symptom and create a cure at the same time. So I think that's what we're trying to do with the upstream conversation, is trying to move that less of treating the symptom and more of creating the cure. And so if we don't have the disease, we don't have to treat it. So I think that's where the upstream piece comes. And I think that COVID is probably a great example of it, where there's no cure. And so we're just treating the symptoms over and over again, and working on a cure. But that's what we have to do with our children and families. We have to figure a way to work so that they're solid, they're together, they feel safe and secure in their homes, they have enough food to eat, they have all the things they need to be safe and secure. And then it will definitely impact their children and youth as well. But you're right. I think it's a whole family approach, and I think that's what everyone's I think in their own way saying. So Sean, you have the last word. We have 2 minutes left.
All right. So what your question at the outset was, how do we collaborate to effect change? I think a big part of that is happening right here. One of the biggest challenges to public life is to try to separate out the noise to find consensus. And for every decision, there are always detractors, there are always downsides. So I think that the challenge for all of us in finding collaboration is to find commonality, to find consensus, and to get in front of leaders and elected officials with that. And I think a gathering such as the one that we're participating in today will go a long way. So these discussions are extremely helpful in identifying the points of commonality. Those are the ones that we can go forward with.
Wonderful. So that's our time. I thank you all, Chief Bernard, Mayor Arnold, MP Casey, for your time, your attention, your generosity of thoughts and ideas, and to all the participants, and to Samantha for the great questions and the awesome prompts.
Thank you for having me.
And then we're going to Patsy to bring us to the next session, I believe.
Thanks so much to the panel for answering those questions and for a real engaging discussion, and also fielding questions from the audience. There are more questions in the session Q&A on Whova. If you get a chance to get in and even write some answers to those questions so that people get a reply, that would be great. We just ran short of time to bring them to you, Scott. So I've just been watching them come in. There's about 4 or 5 questions in there. So anybody gets a chance to go in to Whova, you can find it on session Q&A, and you can there's a place for replies. So if you can write a reply, that would be super. Thank you very much for participating in this panel and moving us, I think, our understanding forward in terms of the issues that you deal with as political leaders, and some of the ways in which the public, we, can work more collaboratively with you. I'm going to move it on now to take a break, and then the concurrent workshops will be starting at 2 o'clock as planned. And you all it's all on the agenda, so you can just click on the workshop that you're assigned to, and in you go.